A big hello to everyone out there who's here to join the Topaz Storytelling Club fun. Welcome back to my channel, where I, your host Caitlin, take you through all the meetings and teach a little about storytelling along the way. August sure has gone by quickly, hasn't it? It's almost time for me and the kids to head back to school. But this is only number 9, so we still have one more meeting to go after this. It won't be held on a Wednesday as all the other ones have been, since next Wednesday is the first day of school, so instead it will be next Monday. For now, sit back and relax as we begin the recap for our penultimate meeting, which occurred on August 21st, 2019. We had 5 attendees for 5 times the fun. Today's story comes from yet another of my favorite children's short story collections. This series was one my mother read growing up, and then she shared them with me when I was younger. I guess I'm just returning the favor. The series in question is none other than the Mrs. Pigglewiggle series by Betty MacDonald. The series follows a magical, miracle-working neighborhood nanny of sorts, whose adventures are as silly as her name. She cures children of their behavioral ailments and befriends them along the way. The particular story I read was the very first one of the series, entitled Mrs. Pigglewiggle Herself, which served as an introduction of the character and her cures. In the story, a little girl named Mary Lou comes to Mrs. Pigglewiggle, saying she is running away from home because she hates doing dishes. Despite trying to talk sense into her, it is only through a dress-up game that the sly old Mrs. Pigglewiggle convinces Mary Lou that doing chores can be made entertaining. When Mary Lou comes back with her friend Kitty, Mrs. Pigglewiggle next shows them how to make a game out of making the bed. From there, all of the neighborhood children start to visit her and play games with her, so that in future stories, she is already well established as a force of good in the neighborhood. This series is just oozing that classic 1950s charm, and that's part of the reason it's one of my favorites. Its age doesn't stop it from tackling many of the same household problems kids struggle with now, and that's why I reintroduced it today for our modern TSC audience. After all, our topic for today is conflict and how it is solved in a story. Conflict and its resolution are like yin and yang, two complementary halves that combine together to make a story interesting and meaningful. If you had nothing but conflict that never got solved, it would be almost too depressing to read about. And on the other hand, if everything was always happy and issues were fixed without a struggle, the story would stagnate very quickly and be too boringly saccharine. They're both equally important, but let's first talk about conflict. Conflict is always what prompts a story to move forward. Because it's so essential, there are near infinite different ways to integrate it into a story. Any number of things could happen, from crisis-level tragedies to slight disappointments. Losing a shoe, failing a test, getting stuck in a thunderstorm, falling ill, or watching the world be conquered by giant robots are all conflicts that none of us want to deal with, but nonetheless have to resolve or respond to in some way. Well, except the robot thing, I guess. I asked the TSC group if they had experienced the same problems that the children in the story did, and they all said they had. Nobody wants to be stuck with chores. There are 2 main types that we can categorize all of these conflicts into: internal conflicts and external conflicts. This refers to whether the conflict is internal or external to the person experiencing it. Let me explain. External conflict is usually easier to grasp for young writers because it's the event that happens. It's the bad guy. It's the action. External conflict is an event involving outside forces beyond the character and is often something that can't be controlled. These are conflicts with other people, like a fistfight, or perhaps the environment, like the thunderstorm example I mentioned. On the other hand, internal conflict is a character's struggles within himself, and these are often more subtle because they are less events and more mental episodes, problems that can fluctuate and overlap with others. They aren't visible, and so not as easily distinguished by other characters, or even the reader. A good story makes liberal use of both internal and external conflict, and often uses one to affect the other. For example, the external conflicts faced on a character's journey, like food shortages, can incite fear and self-doubt about the character's success, which is itself an internal conflict that the character must now overcome. This can cause an almost cyclical effect to occur as well, because that internal conflict of a weakened emotional state can make it all the easier for more external problems to arise, like getting lost because the character is no longer trusting enough of his own intuition to guide him correctly. In short, conflicts are one of the most crucial items in a writer's toolbox, and they come in many, many different forms. Ask your child what kind of problems he experiences in day-to-day life, and try to categorize each one. This is also a great opportunity to really listen to your child's thoughts and have a chance to mediate in any situation that might have upset him. Now for the other side of that coin. Resolution is equally important because, like conflict, it can reveal character traits. The approach that a character takes to solve a problem can be evidence of the things he believes or what makes him stand out from others. It suggests his typical thought process in a way that the reader can really understand in a more visceral way, since actions speak louder than words. A smart character will naturally solve conflicts with his quick wits, while a tough character may be more prone to violence. Mrs. Pigglewiggle is a motherly, kind character, so as we have seen, she helps other people to solve problems and treats them just as seriously as her own. She uses fun games and her optimistic attitude to get things done. Her problem-solving strategies help to characterize her as a helpful and responsible lady. This is why it's important to teach kids from a young age to use healthy and intelligent problem-solving techniques. And, if you want to add in a twist, the resolution of one conflict may only be the beginning of another. Play along with our TSC activity if you want. I gave each child a common problem, like not wanting to share toys, and told all of them to come up with 3 possible solutions: a bad one, an acceptable one, and the best one. Then, illustrate the best one. You can find the highlights on my website. Ask your child why he chose this approach to the problem. If you want, you can even role-play it. To introduce the free write segment, I told them the word of the day, quarrel, which means a fight, or, dare I say it, conflict. The writing prompt was to write a story with a character who has problem after problem. Our surveys looked great, and all in all, there were certainly no conflicts today. Thanks for listening, and join us next time for our final TSC meeting video. Goodbye until then.